Jon Christian Rutigliano, welcome to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Hey, Mark, thanks so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
We had a chance to exchange a few emails prior to Colorado Gold last fall, and you were helping me set up an agent pitch appointment. And then I had to cancel that because I had some good news come along my world. But and then we met at Colorado Gold, and there you were on the second floor at the Renaissance Hotel in Denver on that very busy day with all those agent and pitch appointments as the pitch master for the conference last year. And so, first of all, I just want to start with asking you what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was a really good experience. I had just reached out to Wendy and Mira and Kate to see if they needed any assistance for the year. And coincidentally, the pitch master from the previous years was stepping aside from that role. So they said, hey, Jon, how do you feel about this? And of course, I'm like, oh, yeah, sounds great. What I didn't realize was it was quite a bit of work. And I was kind of doing a bit of baptism by fire, if you will. But we got it done. It was an awesome experience. And I think it went really well in terms of organizational structure and what have you. And it was also very exciting to see so many authors in person, ready to pitch. And it was an exciting time for the conference for sure.
Yeah. Give us an idea, just the sheer number of pitch appointments that were scheduled.
It was all day. It was the second day of the conference. It started first thing in the morning and went all the way to dinner that night. And it was appointment after appointment with only a break for lunch. So my role there was really to keep things moving, letting the agents know when I had about 2 minutes left with their appointees and what have you. And that was my primary role, to keep things on target and on track. And I think that overall went really well.
Yeah. You saw a lot of folks with in a great moment of anxiety and stress, concern. You probably saw some real pros who were handling it like, yeah, it's no big deal, I'm just talking to an agent. But there's high stakes in these moments because so many hours have gone into developing the story that is now the pitch, and you're seeing people really at a critical moment that could change the course of their lives if things go well.
It's a great point, Mark. And I would say that struck me the most as being the pitch master is, regardless of the status of your writing career, I saw people going in as novice writers and people going in with a few books under their belt already, published authors with the same types of nerves and anxiety. Pitching to an agent is never an easy thing. And it was a quite humbling experience for me. So I did see a lot of anxiety. I also witnessed a lot of smiling faces exiting the doors from promising appointments. So it's all about confidence and knowing your work, selecting the right agent, and being prepared. But it was really good. It was interesting to see.
Yeah. Did it teach you anything that you're going to take away yourself if you come back around to being one of the ones in the hot seat asking for time with an agent or editor? Will that inform how you go into that day?
Absolutely. I think the first thing is making sure that you are sitting in front of the right agent, to say the least. I mean, I think a lot of people might take conference as an opportunity to take that opportunity. It's a benefit of being in conference to take the opportunity to pitch, and I would recommend to people to do that. I also think it's important to know the genre that the agent is there to present, and practice and have your pitch down. You want to be prepared as if you're ready to do this, and I think is something that I would take away for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Yep. Wow. Well, we want to talk about your debut novel that came out a little while ago, Reclamation. But before we get there, could you just sort of introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and how long you've been writing, and maybe just touch on when you first encountered RMFW.
Yeah, love to do that. I'm originally from New England. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, Rocky Hill, Connecticut, and I went to high school there. I went to the University of Connecticut, studied economics,
Go
um,
Huskies. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, actually.
Mm.
And the funny thing is, when I was growing up, I was kind of that person that everyone identified as he's kind of a homebody, not too adventurous and what have you. So, right after I graduated college, I wanted to break that mold a little, and I up and moved to Washington D.C. And I spent a year there doing event planning. And during the course of that time, I ended up taking a business trip out to Denver, where we went to look at a hotel for the event we were hosting. It was at the Adams Mark Hotel. And that night I went out into Larimer Square, went to a pub called Josephina's, and I just met people. It was surreal. Just people, hey, how are you? Where are you from? Oh, that's awesome. Let's go skiing. And I'm like, I left and I said, this is where I want to be. So
Yeah.
right after that experience, I was pretty young still. I quit my job, and I had $500 in my wallet in a moving truck, and I moved cross country from DC to Colorado, and I haven't looked back. It's here. That was in 1999, and it's here where I've met many of my close friends now. My wife. I have two boys. So 22 years in Colorado. I'm a semi-native, and I'm proud to
Yeah.
do that. I
Yeah.
call Colorado my
Yeah.
second home.
Yeah. What do you do professionally, by the way?
My professional job, if you will, is I work for a medical device company in Englewood, and I do their regulatory work. So I work for quality assurance and regulatory affairs. So I deal with government audits and things like that. So a little bit of stress there. So writing is a good escape, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So, you've been writing along the way?
Yeah, actually, um, as most authors, will tell you, I had just this urge to write, even in elementary school and junior high. I remember we would have these writing assignments. Sometimes I would turn in these 30-page essays about things, and my teachers would just shake their head, man, what's wrong with you, right? But I think that sort of set the stage for me. And then in 2007, um, my family here went through some loss. We lost my father-in-law to
Mm.
ALS, and that was a difficult time for my family, my wife's side of the family in particular. But
Yeah.
it was really painful and sad moment. And I think I expressed a lot of that emotion in my first novel that I just sort of attempted to write. No guidance or anything. I just wrote one. And then when I finished that, I kind of looked at myself and reflected on it and said, what do I do with this? It was then that I went and found Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers. And I was living in Aurora at the time, and I found a critique group that was meeting at the Aurora Library. And I took my novel there, and I said, well, let's go. Let's see what this is all about here. And of course, it was terrible. It got trashed almost immediately. But I didn't want to give up. I loved my critique group. I loved some of the friends I met there for sure. And that was my first encounter with Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers in critique groups. And that's definitely something that Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers should bring to anybody who, at any level of author, and interest in being a novelist, is getting some of that work critiqued, to say the least.
Yeah. Scary first little introduction to the world of getting your prose evaluated by people you kind of know but don't know, and then obviously over time you grow to know better,
Yeah.
and you get to return the favor by looking at some of their stuff as well, which is interesting.
Definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. And you get to see different styles, and reading is obviously a good way to hone your critique and get your own skill set down. If you like something that your colleagues are writing, then something you can keep in mind when you're doing your own writing. So it's definitely useful.
Yeah. And some good friendships come out of that.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's actually where I met Susie Brooks, who is the ended up being the publisher for my book Reclamation, which was published in October of 2020 by Literary Wanderlust.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So was the first project you brought to the critique group was not the story that became Reclamation at all?
No, that story has been
Yeah.
shelved as sort of a life lesson. Maybe someday I will sort of dust it off and see, with the knowledge that I have about writing now, if I can make that work. But sometimes things are best left on the shelf. But we'll see.
Yeah. Just a little practice novel.
Exactly.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so then the idea for Reclamation came to you somewhere along the line in there.
It did, and I pitched it along. This was probably about, I guess, maybe 5 years ago now, or something like that. And my critique group had kind of abandoned ship for a little while, but I reconnected with Susie, and I pitched the idea for Reclamation. It was just a very small outline at the time, and she said,
Hmm.
John, I like this. If you finish this and it's good, obviously, then I think that we can talk about publication. So it was actually oddly at a time where I was expecting my second child. I just kind of found out. So I'm like, oh, I've got 9 months before madness ensues. So I've got to make this
Yeah,
work. So I spent that time in the quiet mornings, generally trying in the evenings, writing Reclamation, and Susie ended up publishing it. So I'm really excited about that.
that's great. Well, tell us the original pitch and set this up for it. It's kind of an unusual idea. It's speculative fiction, I guess you'd call it, right?
Yeah, it's in the realm of it. I guess this is the odd thing about my work. When struggling to find a genre, we kind of settled on something called philosophical fiction, and that was a bit by design. But Reclamation, it picks up 4 years after a second civil war that divided the United States into three regions. I call them the Colorado Territory, the Texas Territory, and then just the United States. And my protagonist, his name is Case Tappan, and he's a pacifist and resident of the Colorado Territory. And he wants nothing to do with these warring sides. He just wants to live in complete freedom. In fact, I describe in the story the Colorado Territory as a personhood of unique individuality. It's one of symbiosis without written doctrine, political or religious. And along the way, and I should say, unfortunately, Case is met by a reclamation movement that's afloat, and this is led by the evil President Everett of the United States of America. And Case is unable to stop a vicious and provocative attack on his occurring on his land, which does take lives in my story. But he believes this will lead to even more bloodshed, and in an attempt to sort of for the United States to reclaim the land that they believe was properly theirs. And I don't want to spoil too much, but
Yeah.
along the way, he's abandoned by those he trusts. Most notably, my secondary character, Callie Stanton, who goes to the Texas Territory to try to help, to try to get support. And Case just thinks that's going to make things even more violent. He also encounters an abandoned U.S. soldier, Rena, who becomes his love interest. She's intellectually curious, and he has to convince her to help him because ultimately he becomes essentially a political prisoner for the United States. And I'll just kind of leave it there because hopefully that's enough of a tease to get the folks listening here interested in this story and maybe wanting to read it. So that's what Reclamation is about.
That's great. How far in the future is it set? Do you specify?
It's about around 2030, and
Okay.
interestingly, it's not dystopian in any way. I don't want people to
Yeah.
think that. In fact, one of the comments that I get most commonly is, "Gosh, John, I almost feel like this is something that could really happen." I
Yeah.
try to use sort of current events in a fictional way that sort of feel real, right? And then have the rest of it is obviously all fiction and what have you. But people read it and say, I almost sense this is something that could happen. And I
Yeah.
actually love when people tell me that. It's kind of scary, but I also love when people tell me that.
Yeah. How do you balance, you call it philosophical fiction. How do you balance philosophy and story? Do you try to hide the philosophy? In other words, bury it in a character, or are you a little more outright and overt with your point of view?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that was the most difficult part of the writing process for this particular story. Was I am just by nature sort of contemplative and philosophical, and that would make kind of a boring story, just the big, book of philosophy. No one, well, certain people would want to read it, like myself, but I really wanted an action story. I wanted to have something that was engaging for people who really like action, and want to just sort of melt into a good story. But I also wanted something for those readers that appreciate some of the philosophy about society and in different and unique ways, perhaps, to look at possibilities of society, and where maybe we as individuals fit into these societies. So the philosophy is spoon fed in, often just through the scene setting sometimes, and even with dialogue with my character, interaction and what have you. And so I did want to focus more on the action to keep the story going, but I also wanted to spoon feed in the philosophy in a way that even your passive reader would pick up on. So I think I accomplished that.
Great. And so you were bringing this story to critique group and making improvements along the way with their help, correct?
Yeah, most notably Susie.
Yeah.
She ended up, also being my critique partner along the way. And it's a funny story because at one point the story was twice its length, and we were about halfway through the story, and Susie was critiquing it, and she looks and says, Jon, right here, where this part of the story, this is the most dynamic part of your story, and I think this is maybe where it should start. And I almost lost my mind. I'm like, see,
Yeah.
you are kidding me. I'm like, that's just half my story. You just want to,
Yeah.
rethink. And I went back home and I thought long and hard about that. And I ultimately settled on the fact that I think she was right. And I'm really glad that I made those edits and those cuts. It ended up being a much more dynamic story as a result. And as an added bonus, I actually have another half of a story that maybe I could rework as a prequel or
Yeah.
or something of that nature. So I think that's just another example of where critique groups and working with people who you can trust to give you honest feedback can really benefit yourself as a writer.
Right. And then once you finished the critique group process, you also brought it to Literary Wanderlust and
Yeah.
went through yet another round of editing, I assume.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, tons of editing after that. In fact, by the time my book was published, I said, this is the last book on planet Earth I want to read right now. I
Yeah.
just read it so many times, I could virtually recite the book. But,
Hmm.
in as authors, I think that part is very frustrating, very difficult, because I think we are our own worst critiquers, right? I think every time I went through the edit process, I found things that I wanted to change or just didn't like. And at some point you kind of have to say to yourself that's it, I'm done, this is good
Yeah.
enough, this is, maybe it could be a little bit better, but so could anything. And so you just have to let it go, take a deep breath, exhale, and take the time to be proud of the work that you've done. And that's an important lesson that I learned as well.
Yeah. That's great. And it came out in October or fall-ish of 2020. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
How's it doing? What have you found about the process of once your book is out? What have you found about networking and marketing? Finding places to bring it to your audience.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's obviously a challenging part, especially as a novice writer. So you have to do a lot of self-marketing, self-promoting. Started a website,
Mhm.
johnchristianauthor.com. I think that's important way for people to get information, to give updates about events, occurrences of when you might be, out there in the public and things like this. So I did that. I did a lot of Zoom sessions. I networked with local libraries. I found I had a lot of response from my hometown in Connecticut. So I did several, events for libraries out there. Libraries are just a great resource, and I think
Yeah.
they're still available for people, and they love having authors, come and talk. And there's always an interest in that. So I found some audience there. And then obviously Rocky Mountain Fiction Writer is another great mechanism to network and connect with people and get your work, more exposure for your work. And so I'm eternally grateful to even meeting someone like yourself and doing this podcast is great. And that's all courtesy of Rocky Mountain Fiction Writer.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. So what have you found in terms of just connecting this Reclamation, the whole book to, is there a group of writers you'd kind of say it belongs to this kind of world, or do you try to help people make connections? If you like this guy, you might like my stuff, or has that helped you at all?
Yes, I would say for me, I would say is I was never really trying to emulate any particular type of author. I wouldn't say this is an overly popular genre, so I had to kind of let the action stand on its own. But what I found myself doing over the past few years was reading classic works of literature that I might have read in high school and looking at it from my perspective now that I have a bit more wisdom about the world and society. So the past few years, I read books like, reread books like To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee, and Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand, and The Red Badge of Courage, Stephen Crane. And these are obviously engaging stories, and their authors do a lot of philosophy that is within the context of these books. And it was a style in which, not as a point of comparison, but as a point of stylistically trying to emulate that type of things, right? Harper Lee talks a lot about justice and democracy. Ayn Rand talks of capitalism, communism, and Stephen Crane talks a lot of justification for war, for example. So these are a lot of philosophy books that also are really telling stories that sort of captivate the reader. So I think if you are someone who likes those types of stories, Reclamation is a book for you. It's a book about it's a book about freedom and individuality. That's a big theme of mine. It's for an audience that's maybe searching for themselves and asking, how do I, as an individual, maybe weave into the fabric of society? I think it's also about empowering yourself and emboldening yourself as an individual. The big theme of my story is taking back your life, because if you take back your life, then the whole of society benefits from that action. And I really hope that maybe readers pick up on that in the story. So the word reclamation has double meaning for me as well. Reclaiming that land, but also reclaiming yourself as an individual within this society. So a lot of deep thoughts there, but for sure, those are the kind of things I often think about when I write.
Yeah, interesting point. It seems like the world right now is asking all of us to choose up sides and to declare which camp we're in on various very, very competitive, combative issues.
Yeah, and that certainly can be a struggle in today's world, with information sort of flying at us from all directions. And that's why I think it's important to sort of take a step back and focus on our own lives, right? Mark, I know you're a lover of nature, for example, and I think living in Colorado is a perfect opportunity to do that, or maybe you can disconnect from, the things that are causing stress. I'm a Generation X person, so I lived half my life with, without devices, with nothing vibrating in my pocket, for example, or dinging in my ears. And then the other half of my life where all of a sudden everything was super urgent, right? So I have that sort of ability to understand that balance. And I hope that, people can take that opportunity to say, I need to reconnect with the things that are most important in my life. Turn off the devices, escape into nature for a little bit and think about that. Maybe that's your family, maybe that's your job, maybe that's writing. Whatever it is, if you can focus on those positive things in your life, then that positive energy will translate into the world and into society. And I believe that. And I hope people can appreciate that message and see some good in a challenging world that we live in.
Yeah, that's great. So are you carrying those ideas and themes over into the next writing project, and how's that going, if it's going?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
One thing I've tried to stay true to is if is that voice that I've got, and uh, I happen to be someone who believes that the you know that people tend to gravitate towards uh, doing good things and the positive energy in life. I just my personal philosophy on that, and um, so my work will always try to embody that notion for good or bad, right? So I am working on another project right now. It's I think the one that has the most legs that I'm working on now is this kind of a ghost story. It's a story of two teens that are united by a ghost who needs these people to understand sort of an unnerving reality of yore, so they can preserve freedoms for people at the present time. So that's my concept that I have working on right now. I've got my outline done, and I'm working on that. And my objective is to maybe have something perhaps ready by the time conference rolls around for 2022. So it's good to set some writing goals as well. So we'll see how this goes.
Yeah. Now, are you signed up to be the pitch master again this coming conference?
Yes, I can confirm I will be the pitch master for 2022. We have already several agents on board. I believe 9 as of this discussion right here. So, barring any cancellations, all in person this year, no virtual aspect of
Right.
the pitch sessions this year. But 9 agents representing many different genres. So, a super exciting time for those who are ready to do some pitch sessions for 2022. Sign up early and select your agents. Do your research, and we'll be there to make the process smooth for you.
Yeah. If you end up pitching yourself, that'll be interesting how you manage that to walk
Yeah.
in a, yeah,
I guess I kind of have
really,
that luxury if I'm doing the scheduling, but I
yeah,
feel like I
yeah,
need to be ready for that. So we'll see.
yeah,
I'm going
yeah.
to set that as a goal.
That's fantastic. Well, good luck with the new project. It sounds another very different kind of
Yeah.
approach. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So as we kind of wrap up here, and we always like to give our guests a chance to promote another author or suggest a book, a recent book you might have loved that you want more people to read. Love to hear your recommendations.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think a couple authors that come to mind. One is Charles Kowalski. He's a fellow author who has published also through Literary Wanderlust. He has a great book. I recommend Mind Virus. It's a book about a peace-loving professor who is seeking atonement for some crimes he committed as an interrogator. And he's also confronted with having to stop a global biological threat, interestingly. And then another fantastic author is Melissa Falconfield. Her debut novel is called What Burns Away, and I know she has a second novel coming out real soon. It's a story about loyalties of the heart, growing up and facing your past. So please check those authors out.
That's great. Charles was on the podcast some time ago. What a blast of he was just a riot to chat
Yeah,
with.
that's
Really,
great.
really fun. Yeah, I can't remember the title we were chatting about with him, but he's a very interesting mind at work there, to say the
To say
least.
the least, yes.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have a copy of your book handy just to hold it up and let folks
Yeah.
see this awesome cover? And yeah,
Can you see that?
there
Yep,
it
that's
is.
there it is. It's a Reclamation. I really hope that people pick it up. It's available on Amazon. You can go to Literary Wanderlust and see it there, or you can just head to my website, jonchristianauthor.com, and you can have links to where you can pick this up. So I encourage everyone to do that.
Fantastic. Jon Christian Rutigliano.
That's right.
Almost got it there. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you so much for your time today. And we will catch up with you when book 2 is out.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate this opportunity, and we'll talk again real soon.